Okay, good morning. So, Bez Hashem, today will be our last class on this page, and then tomorrow we'll get back to chapter 10 of Tanya. That's the plan, Bez Hashem. Okay, so the last piece of the puzzle, last piece of this picture here is the godly soul, or we're translating it, the word nefesh, as conscious. So the conscious that is godly, or the godly conscious, if you will. So yesterday we explained how using the other page, we explained how every soul had the full system of intelligence, emotions, and then thought, speech, action. Intelligence and emotions, that's the personality of the soul itself. And thought, speech, and action is like the systems and the tools by which it expresses itself. Thought expresses itself to itself, speech to someone else, and then action even farther to the world out by literally making an implant in the world based on whatever I'm feeling or thinking or understanding. Now we explain that the difference between um, the Nefesh Bahamas, the animal soul, or natural slash vivifying, the three names Alter gives it, or Nefesh Sichlis, the rational soul, the conscious that's rational, is not a question of whether they have intelligence or not. The animal soul also has intelligence. It's just that the animal soul's intelligence is in service of its animalistic pursuit, the pursuit of pleasure, the avoidance of pain. So it's dominated by the emotional sphere, but doesn't lack intelligence. It has intelligence. Like, if you want to take that argument even further, you could say dolphins are extremely intelligent. It's all about survival, right? And the same thing with other animals that have intelligence. Their intelligence is not in the abstract. It's intelligence just for survival. The rational self is the abstract philosophy thinking that humans have, the abstract thinking. But it too has the emotional component. It's only that the emotional component here is only in the service of rationalization. Okay. Morning, Yisrael. So now the question becomes the godly soul, the nefesh hasichlis, nefesh elokis, the conscious that's godly. So it too has the full system of intelligence and emotions. But what's it's dominated by? What's its dominant feature that drives everything else? Right? The rational soul is driven by rationality and it brings the emotions along for the ride. The animal soul is driven by emotion and it brings the irrationality for the ride. Okay, what about the godly soul? Makes it very difficult to understand that, to explain that, because well, first of all, what exactly makes one feeling more godly than another? Right, that's number one, and number two, godly itself, the notion of God, is beyond definition. So, what does it mean, a soul that is godly? What definition are you giving to that?
Well, it's very simple. You get your neshama from Hashem, you have a part of Hashem.
Right, but we're talking about a conscious. So let's keep on using that word better instead of calling it a soul. A conscious that is godly. What does a conscious that's godly look like? Conscious that's rational, okay, I got it. Conscious that's animalistic, also get it. What exactly is a conscious that's godly? Uh, yeah, so okay, so you know what you're describing is doing the right things. That doesn't describe that just describes good behavior, that's thought, speech, and action. That doesn't describe a godly conscience. Conscious that's godly. What is that? In the same way you have an animalistic conscious that's driven by, right? So okay, so the basic thing is the godly conscious is driven by serving God. Okay, so its intelligence is going to be all about understanding God or having divine understanding of reality, let's say.
The connection to God.
Right. But we're saying more than that. This is a godly conscious, not me just forging connection to God. See, the rational soul can also forge a connection to God. You can rationalize your way toward a deity philosophically, just purely on a rational level. And that's distinct from the godly soul, which is not discovering God. It is inherently a godly conscious. That's what it is, not because it discovered God. So there has to be a component within the conscious that's capable of receiving absolute transcendence and beyond definition. That's what God is. And that becomes who he is. Okay, so for that, I put this little extra part of the corner there. So the other ones don't have it, right? There's the nefesh ha-sichlis, the conscious that is rational, that is animalistic, natural, vivifying. But if you look at the top left, I added where it says divine spark, nitzis boida, chachma, and then godly. I added those two layers. So these two layers are going to come up in chapter 18 and 19. It's going to come up, and then once he establishes there, it's going to be repeated a number of times throughout the Tanya. And the idea is as follows. It's actually more explained elsewhere in Chassidus, but in Tanya at least it makes reference to it in chapter 18 most notably, and then 19 as well in other chapters. And that is as follows. Let's start from the bottom upward. Okay, so the godly conscious, just like the rational conscious and the animalistic conscious, has what we showed on the other page, the entire system of intelligence and emotions, thought, speech, and action. It has all of that. Okay, our question is, how do you have all of that, but it's not, but it is inherently all godly, whatever that means, especially since godly is beyond definition. So therefore, we have to identify a part of the conscience that is of the least definition and is open to that which is beyond. That is the level of Chachma. That's what Chachma is. Chachma is, though we translated it as wisdom, because that's the conventional translation, Chachma, on the human level, if we were to describe Chachma in, let's say, the Sichlis, the Nefashos Sichlis, let's say, right, because all souls have all 10, have the intelligence and emotions. So let's describe what Chachma is, what this wisdom is in the rational self, and then we'll understand how it works in the godly. Okay. So in the rational self, Chachma would be the idea machine, the creative capacity to churn out ideas. That's what it would be. And that's the beginning of any conscious experience, is an idea. Subconscious experiences are something else. So you can have a great desire for something, willpower, without any idea about it, or even pleasure in something without any idea about it. Those are the subconscious levels. That's Keser. You want to know Keser is the level of desire and pleasure. That doesn't have to begin with an idea because it's a subconscious thing. I just want it. Why? I don't know. I just do. Right? You could also have a want that's born out of I understand something. But there are more primal wants and desires and pleasures that aren't because of anything, it's just because who I am. The most basic of those is the desire for intimacy and the desire for a home. Those aren't things that aren't necessarily, you rationalize your way to desiring a house to live in. No, it's primal. I just need to have a house to live in. The same thing with sharing a life with someone else, right? But conscious experiences, what we're talking about here, the conscious that is, will begin with an idea. There's an idea, and then you can develop it, understand it, care about it, love it, hate it, talk about it, explain it, think about it, act on it. Go through the whole gamut of the conscious experience. It starts with chachma, with an idea. Where does the idea come from?
From the soul.
From somewhere else in the conscious, right? That part of the conscious that gives me, the conscious me, an idea is not something I have direct access to. I can't like open up a drawer in my conscious somewhere and pick out and see all the ideas I'm never going to come up with and pick out the one I want. It comes from,
So it comes from the nefesh?
before we get to the godly necessarily, from the nefesh. The nefesh ha, what? Depends. If it's an idea that's selfish, it's coming from the nefesh ha, Bahamas, animalistic conscious. If it's a rational idea about, I don't know, scientific discovery, it's the rational soul that's doing this, right? But it's not coming from some part that's conscious. The idea is coming from some place that's beyond the conscious, and it just pops into the conscience, right? It's why we have the light bulb imagery. The idea popped into your head. That's how you say it in English. In Hebrew, you call it the barak hamavrik, like the lightning rod. It strikes, and boom, a flash goes off, an idea is there. Where did it come from? You don't know. It's somewhere in the subconscious. And here's the better question: how do you get it to come to you? Once an idea is there, so if I have a better mind, I can analyze it better. If I have a weaker mind, I analyze it a little weaker. If I have this kind of mind, I analyze it that way. If I have that kind of mind, I analyze it that way. That's only after the idea is there. And that's Bina, the next level, right? But Chachma itself, the idea to come to me, how do I do that? So here's the irony. If you speak to anyone who's creative in that way, that comes up with ideas, what you do is actually you try to think of nothing. You try to open up your head and allow it to like come in. So, like sometimes you're thinking about something, you're trying to find a solution to the problem. It's not coming. You go to sleep, wake up the next morning, and boom, it's there. So what happened? The day before, you were so busy thinking about it that you actually stopped the creative process from just giving you something. And then when you slept on it and like you cleared your mind, it's not so cluttered by how you understand it that it came to you, right? So chachma then is not just the capacity to come up with ideas. That's one level of chachma. But deeper, actually, in some places in Chassidus, it splits chachma into two, and the word chachma into two words, koyach and ma. Koyach and ma. The word koyach means potential. That's the idea machine or power, potential, power. Ideas come to me. Then the word ma means what. That's the ability to say, what are you? Just give it to me. So the highest level of the conscious is actually the ability to be open to that which is beyond the conscious. That is why in the godly soul, what's dominant is this power of Chachma. So, because in the rational soul, what's Chachma going to do? Where's the idea? Idea about what? Whatever. It's going to solve the problem that's in front of me, whatever the intellectual problem I'm facing is. And with the animalistic soul, what's the Chachma? Give me an idea that's going to get me the most pleasure. I don't know. Mm. Right? But in the godly soul, it's this capacity for the soul to say whatever you want, whatever you're thinking. So there's a part of the conscience whose job it is to set itself aside and receive. That's what chachma is. In the rational soul, that's the ability to step aside and stop thinking so much and allow for the creative idea to come in. But in the godly soul, it's the same capacity to put myself, my own conscious aside, and to allow for that which is beyond to give me something to be conscious about. So in the godly soul, chachma is going to dominate. This is in Chassidus all over. The godly soul is dominated by chachma, whereas the rational soul is dominated by seichel, by intelligence, by bina more specifically, the analytics, and the animal soul is dominated by the feelings and emotions. What makes me feel good? What makes me feel pain, and avoid that. The godly soul is going to be dominated by the power of chachma, the ability to say what, to put the self aside and allow for something beyond to give me conscience, rather than me decide what my conscience is. So the definition then of the godly soul would be to set itself aside. That's its whole entire personality. Its emotions are about setting itself aside in the service of. Its ideas are about setting itself aside in the face of understanding the truth and observing the truth and viewing the truth and analyzing the truth. Its entire personality is in an ironic way not about the self.
Bittul.
It's bittul. That's what chachma is. Chachma is bittul. It's surrender, to set the self aside and to allow for whatever the divine wants to offer. Be like a receptacle. To be a recipient. To be a recipient. That would be the dominating character of the godly soul. So the godly soul's highest point is chachma, which dominates and says what, and what's inserted. What's inserted in there is nitzvah's bar, the divine spark. This you may have heard the Medrash says, right?
In the book, the Medrash says?
No, the Medrash, comma, says, right? There's a Midrash. It says about the soul, the godly soul, Chamisha Shemus Nikrola. The godly soul has 5 names. And these 5 names are identified in Chassidus as 5 levels of the neshama. This is godly soul. Nefesh, Ruach, Neshama, Chaya, Yechida. Okay? Nefesh would be the level of the conscience that dominates thought, speech, action. Ruach would be the level of conscience that dominates my emotional feelings. Nefesh Ruach Neshama would be the level that dominates my rationality. Chaya is my superconscious, the willpower that we describe as that's subconscious or beyond consciousness that can be defined. And then Yechida is, as the way the Eitz Chaim puts it is, Nitzutz Echad Boira. There's a spark of creator, divine spark, that invests itself in Nitzutz Echad Nivra, a created spark. And those 2 sparks, the divine spark invested in the created spark, become the level of Yechida. That what we call the soul essence. That's what we're describing here in the top left here. You have the level of the created, that is to say, the level of consciousness, because consciousness is a created being. The godly soul is also, in some ways, a created being, because it's a conscious. How could you be a conscious that's not a created being? We wouldn't be able to handle it in our body. certainly not in our minds. It transcends anything. So it has to be a created entity because it has to have chachma, bina, das. It has to have this whole system of consciousness. Otherwise, what I can't talk about it. I can't think about it. I can't look at it because it doesn't have any definitions. So it has nitzutz boida. It's got a created capacity, a, a little spark that's a created entity in that it's open to what do you want, and in there comes a divine spark, and together that makes the soul essence. That's the yechida. It's like that meeting point in which the part of me that has no thoughts about me and sets itself completely aside in favor of what is the divine desire and what's the divine reality. That's the meeting point.
So actually the yechida, which is the part of the person, right, himself, is composed of something that's selfless.
Correct. That's correct. Because it's
like opposite.
Exactly. Because it's very difficult for a person to say, I'm setting myself aside. You started that sentence with the word I.
Who are you?
It's almost impossible, right? But the highest capacity we have to set ourselves aside is this capacity of chachma, just wait for like instruction, to wait for something to be brought in, something to be experienced from beyond. It's the highest we can get, right? There's to your point, there's a mimer, there's a discourse from the Rebbe Rashab, Chassidus Chabad Rebbe, who describes levels of like self-surrender to Hashem. He explains them like in succession, starting from below to above. So I'm surrendering that my action only be in the way Hashem wants, my speech, my thoughts, my feelings, my ideas. It goes higher and higher and higher. And he describes how you can climb from one to the next. You can slowly build and like become more and more self-surrendered unto Hashem. Then he says the highest level of self-surrender is the guy who's not even aware that he's surrendered. He's not even aware that he's nullified to Hashem. And he says that level.
What do you mean?
He's not even aware.
I mean, of course, I'm.
Yeah, there's no
it's not like I'm trying to do
exactly. All the levels before then, he's trying. Okay, I'm aware of my behaviors. They aren't the way they're supposed to be, so I'm going to surrender then want to Hashem. I'm aware of my feelings. They're not the way they're supposed to be, so I'm going to.
And he's not even aware that he has a choice of his own.
It's just the way it is. It's just I'm in the service of Hashem. There's no like he didn't work. So explaining this level, you can't like climb from all the lower levels and then get to the higher level. You're either in it or you're not in it. You can't be aware.
So you're either born in that level or not.
I don't know how you get there. I'll give you an example of where I saw this. My father's father, in his day, Baruch Hashem was good morning. He was he was a wealthy businessman, did very well, and he gave a lot of money to tzedakah, like a lot of money. Over the years, a lot of figures. Anyway, so I spent Shabbos with him once, and it was just me and him. We were saying Chaim a little bit. And he was telling me some stories. Anyway, so I asked him, I said, Zayd, you just give away money like that? Like, I don't understand. Specifically the yeshiva. He was the secretary of the yeshiva. The Chabad yeshiva in Melbourne is like the centralized institution that operates all of Chabad in Melbourne. He was the secretary of the board for like about 50 years. For however long. He was the secretary of the board for many, many years. And so he would give a lot of money there. So I asked him, like, nonstop, like, what's the deal? So he told me something which I hope to never forget. He's told me, I don't understand. So because I am not good enough to be a teacher, therefore I get to be rich. Understand what he said?
Meaning his position is like a negative.
Yeah, it's not like, oh, I'm so magnanimous and I'm now going to give away some hard-earned money that I deserve to someone who doesn't have. For him, it was like, oh, I was like, in what world is it more moral that I have more money than he does? Well, I understand your question. Right? So that's a level where he's not like he worked his way to trying to get to a level of bittul. It's to begin with.
So he sees himself as a low-level worker as opposed to the person that's actually delivering the goods. He's supporting the delivery of the goods.
Exactly. Being a teacher is the highest calling in the world. I'm not talented enough to do that. Okay, so
I'm supporting the teacher.
And because I'm not talented enough to be a teacher, therefore I get to be rich. Like, in what world is that moral? Correct.
You'd rather have.
It's a whole different way of thinking.
Yeah.
That's right. That's bittul. Where like it's not you're not thinking about the bittul. It's just the way it is. Right. That's how the level of chachma interacts with Hashem. This level of chachma is just. It's not like I'm now going to set myself aside in favor of what the divine thinks or feels. That's how the godly soul naturally is. Its whole reality is, well, what do you want? And because it doesn't have a sense of self in that regard, this level of chachma, that's why it's the recipient for nitzutz boyer, the divine spark, and that's what dominates the godly soul. So all of its feelings are going to be in reaction to what did we receive from Hashem. Its ideas are going to be analyzation of that. Its feelings are going to be in reaction to that. Its thoughts are going to be in service of that in speech and action as well. In the same way, the animal soul's entire intelligence and emotions and thought, speech, actions all going to be the service of how do I pursue pleasure and avoid pain, and the intelligence, emotions, thought, speech, action of the rational soul is going to be in the service of how do I understand this better. The entire everything of the godly soul, intelligence, emotions, thought, speech, and actions, all going to be in the service of well, what did you give us? Whatever you gave us, that's what we have. That's it. And that's the godly soul's uh, entity, right? And getting back to the beginning where we started off with the babushka, it's all layers of deeper and deeper and deeper. So if I look at the same action, let's say putting on tefillin, let's say, I can do layers there. In my tefillin, what feelings are there? Well, one is I don't want to be a social outcast. That could be one feeling. That's certainly an emotion, an animalistic one. One is it's good. It brings me pleasure because it focuses my day. Okay, it's a little more elevated, but still within the realm of the self, the animal soul. And then I can say, well, I've rationalized my way to understand it. There was divine revelation. This is the purpose of creation, and if I'm doing it, right, that there's a rational soul, but I'm getting closer to godly. And then there is the highest point is what God wants. I'm doing it, and they can all be at the same time, but they're all coming from like layers of my feelings, matching the layers of who I am. Of an animal soul, inside of which there's a rational, inside of which there's ultimately a godly, inside of which there's this level which says, Chachma, what do you want? And that's the spark of Hashem that's there. It says, you're a godly entity.
So using this analogy or example with the babushka doll, what's the core? It's the divine spark. That's
That's correct. So but the animalistic, which is the pursuit of pleasure, and that divine spark are almost polar opposites in their drives. Completely polar opposites. The animal soul is all about the self, and the godly spark is all about well, what do you want, right? So that the middle guy, that's where the battle happens. Is the rational soul, because the rational soul can look both directions. It could rationalize its way to being completely selfish, like Ayn Rand's objectivism, which is all about being selfish, or it can rationalize its way to saying, the highest pursuit is to be in the pursuit of the transcendence. It's a rational communication, but it's a rationalization that speaks to or pulls me in the direction of the godly soul's pursuits. The godly soul doesn't need that rationalization. That's just who it is. But if I want to bring my animal soul along, I have to use the rationalization of there's godliness here. This is transcendence. This is beyond. This is the highest purpose.
Well, I don't need to bring the animal soul along. I don't
I
have
do.
to understand. I don't have to justify it for the animal soul. I don't even have to understand what I'm doing to do
Okay.
everything.
The end is you do have to, because your animal soul.
No, you would like to. No, some people you come with time they have no idea what they're doing. Yeah,
right. The animal at the end, if you want to have a relationship, it's ongoing with Hashem. First of all, your animal soul physically is doing the wrapping.
Yeah. Because
that's physically what the vivifying the chiyunis. That's
that if you assume the person has an animal soul, whatever. If it's someone.
Oh, it's not there. We began with it. The Alter says in the beginning of Perek Aleph, Kol Ish Yisrael, every single Jew, Echad Tzaddik, Echad Rasha, has both animal soul and godly soul. Because if you have an animal soul,
thought one is sleeping and one.
Yeah, but if you don't want to call it animalistic, call it vivifying. Call it this.
Oh, but how do you right now we're not talking about Nefesh.
Exactly.
That's why we're not talking about
not Yekter Hara.
Okay.
But it's Nefesh ha chiyunis.
Yeah, I understand.
It's even Bahamas in some way because Tzaddik also has children.
Right.
He also goes to the bathroom. He also eats.
So it's really not like animalistic. It's just human.
Precisely. Human done wrong becomes animalistic, but it's correct. That's right. So in order to bring along, in other words, what I'm most conscious of all day, the most part, is the animal soul. Hopefully a little rationalization in there too. For the most part, I'm driven by what makes me feel good and what doesn't make me feel good, and stay away from that which doesn't make me feel good. That's the human experience, right? But if I want to get a little deeper in life, I have to use my rationalization to say, well, hold on a second. There's another voice here that's so much more valuable. It's so much greater. It's so much bigger. That's the Nefesh HaSitless trying to bring my animal soul, which is the me that I'm most conscious of. Like we'll learn this later. Alter said that for most people, the I that you speak of when you say I am hungry, who's the I talking here? For the most part, we're talking about the animal soul. Even when I say I think, it's the animal soul. Maybe the animal soul is expressing something that the rationalization brought about, right? And even when I say I want to serve Hashem, who's saying that I? It's the animal saying the I. But it's the animal soul, after it's been introduced through the rationalization that there's an Abish there, there's a God, and there's a part of me that's connected to Hashem that I need to service, and so on and so forth. Right? So the battleground all takes place in the middle one in the Nefashos, the rational soul. So when the Alter Rebbe says that the person makes his godly soul overpower his animal soul, that person, that's the Nefashos, the rational soul. Okay, okay, so that hopefully gives us some better clarity. And God willing, tomorrow we'll get back to our Tanya text. I think we're at 10 or 15 lines into chapter 10. Yes, but Bezashem tomorrow. Have a good day, everyone.
Awesome.